Well, good evening, everyone. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for coming out tonight, especially those of you who arrived on skates. The traffic situation has been really bad. Our office manager normally arrives about 3/4 of an hour beforehand and sets up an information desk outside. She called me from the Manuel's bypass road saying she'd been blocked in there since 5:30. I think there have been something like 10 cars off the road on the cross-town arterial, so it's please be careful going home tonight. It's great turnout, actually. A lot of new faces here tonight. Particularly good turnout given that Gwyn Dyer is competing with us tonight at the Summer in Town, so I imagine he's got a good turnout as well. My name is Larry Cody, and I'm president of the Newfoundland Historical Society. We normally start our monthly meetings with a few business items before we turn things over to the speaker, but they don't normally take much time. In fact, I only have 3 tonight. So I mentioned at our last meeting that His Honor, Lieutenant Governor John Crosby, is stepping down. That's quite common knowledge, but Mr. Crosby has served as patron of this society. And as promised, we prepared a letter on behalf of members thanking him for his interest and assistance over the last 5 years. He's been a really great promoter of what we do, our publications in particular. He's purchased more copies of Short History of Newfoundland that we prepared than anybody else. I think he's 200 or 300 of them. Every dignitary that comes to the province gets a copy. So. And just as we mailed off a thank you letter to Mr. Crosby, we received a letter from him himself, a very nice letter, and I want to read parts of it for you. Dear Mr. Cody, as my term as Lieutenant Governor will end in the next few weeks, my term as patron of the Newfoundland Historical Society will also end at that time. And I write now to tell you that I have enjoyed my relationship with your society and its members very much and will miss the pleasant relationship that developed. I have found that the opportunity of getting to know your organization and others with similar goals has certainly sharpened my appreciation for the continuing wonderful work done by volunteers in our province. You and your associates have for years now done outstanding work, and it was a pleasure to be associated with you. In short, I was proud to be your patron, and I wish you all much such success and fulfillment in the future. And then on the bottom, he wrote a handwritten note, a wonderfully important cause. So that was kind of nice to get. And shortly after that, we learned that 2 members of our board, Jim Hiller here in St. John's, and Doug Wells, who's our regional rep in Harbour Britain, had been awarded Diamond Jubilee medals. And you may know something about those, but those were commemorative medals created to mark the 2012 celebrations of the 60th anniversary of Her Majesty Queen Elizabeth ceding her accession to the throne. And the award recognizes significant contributions that bring credit to province and country. So the Society can now boast 2 recipients on the 1 executive board, and something we'll certainly highlight in our next newsletter. So congratulations to Jim. Jim is here tonight. Congratulations, Jim. And also to Doug Wells in Harbour Britain. One final matter, a reminder really, if you happen to miss any of our monthly lectures, or you know of anybody out of town or who otherwise can't make a meeting, most of our lectures are available online on our website. There's Keith taping it now. So it's put on shortly after, and if you want to mention it to some of your friends, it's a nice thing to look through. Our website has a lot of other features. It has our newsletters. The most recent one was distributed earlier this month. It has our upcoming lectures. It has a list of symposia past and proposed. It has a number of research links and other goodies. So, check it out if you get a chance. Okay, that's all I have for now. I'd now like to call on Kieran Miller to introduce tonight's speaker. Kieran.
Can you guys hear me? So thanks everyone for coming out tonight, especially given the weather. It's pretty awful out. Patricia Grattan is speaking tonight as the writer and producer of the 2011 book City Scene, Artist Views of St. John's from 1785 to 2010. These days, in addition to developing other book projects, she continues research begun as a Canadian Art History Fellow at the National Gallery of Canada and undertakes curatorial projects. She is currently curating a 2014 exhibition of Newfoundland art from the McMichael Canadian Art Collection in Ontario. Her educational background includes degrees in journalism, visual art, and in 2005, an M.Philosophy in Humanities from Memorial University. Many of you will know her as the Director and Chief Curator from 1982 to 2003 of Memorial University Art Gallery, later known as the Art Gallery of Newfoundland and Labrador and precursor to the Rooms Provincial Art Gallery. As curator, she developed well over 125 exhibitions, primarily of Newfoundland modern and contemporary art, as well as folk art. As director, with her small staff, she won national recognition and many grants for the gallery as one of the country's most active institutions, known for dynamic and innovative programming, but especially for its wholehearted commitment to the exhibition, national and international touring, publication, and collecting of Newfoundland and Labrador artists' work. She was the first chair of both the province's and the city's Art Bank programs and a founding member of the Provincial Museums Association. Nationally, she has been a member of the Canada Council for the Arts, a councillor of the Canadian Museums Association, president of the Canadian Art Museum Directors Organization, and a juror for the Molson Prizes and the Council for Business and the Arts in Canada. Many people would see the Rooms complex as the most tangible evidence of her tenure and of more than a decade's advocacy for a new gallery building. For her contributions to the development of the visual arts in Canada and in this province, Patricia Grattan has received the Atlantic Provinces Art Galleries Association Inaugural Lifetime Achievement Award, Visual Artist Newfoundland and Labrador's Kippy Goins Award, a Canadian Museums Association Distinguished Service Award, and from the Royal Canadian Academy of Art, its 2012 RCA Medal. In addition to all these distinguished accomplishments, she is also my aunt, and I'm very pleased to present her tonight. Ladies and gentlemen, your speaker, Patricia Grattan.
Thank you, Karen. And how's the sound level up there? So you can adjust it. Thank you. I think the other accomplishment is that of Survivor, just to get here tonight. Because we'll endangered ourselves getting across the parking lot there. I hope you noticed that.
I'll make sure you're. Okay.
I hope you noticed the description did not claim I was a historian, because I am not. But inevitably, this book intertwines art and history. And I want to start just telling you that the book developed a little bit backwards. My first interest was in getting more contemporary Newfoundland work into print and easily accessible to the public. But I quickly realized that it needed a historical context and, as well as that, a linking theme, which of course became the city. I have pulled about 37 images out of the 138 that are in the book. So with some emphasis on the historical, given the nature of your group. And I'm not going to talk extensively about the images so much as use them to illustrate, I hope, some of the points. And I hope you all can read the labels from where you are, because I also don't see the point that's up there in repeating it. So the intention of my talk tonight is to show some examples of art about St. John's and talk a bit about why it looks like it does. And I also want to track how and why a professional visual arts community developed here over time, and that inevitably is tied to the development of the city and the province. A particular infrastructure has to develop before you get that kind of arts group. Now, what happened in St. John's is really parallel to what happened in Canada in general by way of development, and indeed I think in probably there's a similar pattern in Australia. So it's a development that has a long period in which the place is captured by artists who are from elsewhere. So it's a view from outside, from explorers or military people, colonial administrators and their families, and usually later on itinerant artists who for one reason or another are coming through as well. And then there's an eventual transition to what I would call the view from within, once things have developed to a level where a professional community can be nurtured and sustained. Art depicting a place changes over time in how artworks look, in what they're made of, and in what subjects appear, and I hope that will be illustrated as we proceed through. Some of the factors in those changes are changing purposes for the art, the audience that the artist is intending to reach, the impact of new technologies, for example, photography or printing technologies, what the market or the audience for arts is looking for, government policies and programs, changing aesthetic ideas and practices, for example, the development of abstract art. To cite an example that has almost no relevance in this province. And then, of course, last, certainly not least, artists' own personal interests and skills. I was warned about this. A very familiar image to you on the left there. And the one on the right, perhaps less familiar, the French attack on St. John's in 1762. I think it's been less reproduced than the one based on reports from Sir Richard Whitburn. And the point here is that the earliest images of the province were made by people who simply had never been here. And the engravers in Germany or Britain or wherever were making their images based on reports or rough sketches from people and doing their best, but using their imagination and also tied to some of the conventions of picture making of their time, the kind of elongated figures, stylized houses, and fairly fanciful images of Aboriginal people. The first more realistic, or the early more realistic images were the work of military and naval men. In and around the province, not that it was a province. This is an example, as was the chart of St. John's Harbour that I used for the title page. The work of James Mears, who is the logbook keeper on the HMS Pegasus, captained by Prince William Henry, in a voyage around part of the island in 1786. And topographical art is a term for the kind of precise, clear, detailed drawings that came largely out of the military and naval academies. Drawing and watercolor were required subjects for the officers who were training. And I think it's clear that the purpose was informational, and the need was for accuracy and precision so that they and their colleagues could know the territory that they were defending or going around. Some of the officers went beyond the clear, precise accuracy, and as you can see here, or the way he positioned the chart in the title page and so on. Mears played around a lot with how he laid out his pages, and in some cases there are the figures inserted, even one where there's a little drawing of himself drawing. And it's a, if you call it ship's log charming, I think it's quite charming. And much of it is, or all of it is online with Library and Archives Canada. Anonymous was as busy in the visual arts as he was in literature. And I'm not sure this pair of images is together anywhere else but in the private collection these come from. You probably have seen the image on the right. Library and Archives Canada has a version of it, but the one on the left, I don't know if it exists in other public collections that people can access. It has some of the precision of topographical work, and an almost anthropological interest, I think, in the details of the fishery and the stages and so forth. These works were made at a time when there were the voyages of exploration or people trying to establish trade routes, and reports coming back, I think, had the public in Britain extremely interested in the practices and the look of other places. And so some of the works are quite detailed in what they show. James Peachy, a surveyor by training, later a military man, spent much of his time in Upper and Lower Canada, but came through Newfoundland and made a number of works, some of which were exhibited at the Royal Academy in London in 1786 and 87. Something struck me as kind of an odd image with that billowing fog or smoke or cloud, and I have never seen another depiction of Signal Hill and the Southside Hills looking so lush. But I think the watercolor has some elements of the picturesque, which was an aesthetic theory that developed in Britain and became very popular. It was virtually a series of rules for how you approach landscape painting, structuring the foreground, middle ground, background. And people were encouraged, if they needed to make a pleasant composition, to move things around a little and to introduce something sort of rustic and rugged. So we can see, I think, elements of that in this Peachy work. And the picturesque kind of continued to influence things for decades to come, actually. Another military man. And at this point, 1824, quite developed fortifications up on Signal Hill. And down, there's already a convention has developed in how people show the stages as those sort of little boxy structures. Somewhere I had a note as to what uniform this is, but I don't have it with me. Does anyone recognize it? In the book, there's another Chichester watercolor of stages and stories at Kitty Vitty. Again, a very strong interest in sorting out the structures and so forth, very information-based. This is an example of one of the colonial administrators. At this point, it was expected that anyone with education in Britain would have a capacity to do watercolor. Mr. Legate is an example of an amateur who did have some accomplishment in this. He would have done a watercolor. His daughter then transferred the image onto a lithostone, and it would have been printed in Britain, probably in Exeter. And both military men and administrators started making prints of some of their work, sometimes to give to friends or sometimes to market. This, according to Chris O'Day, is the only known image, or the only known copy of this image. So at this point in time, there was growing interest in Britain in imagery from the various colonies and other places people were exploring in natural science imagery, and the whatever evidence they had. What was important to people, though, was they wanted to know that the work had been done from someone's direct observation, not the more fanciful kinds of images we saw at the very beginning. So you often do see notes on things taken on the spot, because that gave it an authenticity and that people appreciated. I think in the early 19th century, there was still not much of a market, and probably not much beyond amateur activity in Newfoundland, despite some growth in its population and some changing demographics. Once the fishery was a resident fishery, and there were more schools and religious and recreational organizations and so on. Still limited in terms of the visual arts. More military men, probably Royal Engineers, and these are 2 out of 14 beautiful drawings in the collection of the City of St. John's. And you can see in the series, you can see their topographical training, but also I think they have what's probably a very common interest in Britain in the outdoors and in landscape work. And, I think the drawing of the Waterford River there is particularly beautiful. That there was not much market in St. John's is suggested by the images in the book, but I didn't use it here. William Eager, who did a well-known view of the city from Queen's Battery, it's also known as the Sleeping Soldier, but he left his 24-acre farm outside St. John's and moved into the town in about 1828 and advertised himself as a silhouette maker and a landscape painter, and apparently didn't do very well. He moved in 1834 to Halifax and became a distinguished painter in Nova Scotia. But others tried. I don't know very much about William Goss, though he was English in origin and came to Carbonear as a clerk, then to St. John's as an artist, and I would like to think there are more works of his to be found. It's really quite accomplished, and quite delicate depiction, but charming. A little lesson in the fragility of paper. But wanted to use this work. I think it shows the sort of ongoing impact of the tenets of picturesque picture making. Again, little known about, virtually nothing known about Clark. But he's used, again, these are very careful compositional layers. And to me, there's a sort of festive kind of air to this. It could, certainly, it doesn't feel like Newfoundland to me. It feels more as if it could be somewhere in Europe. It has some picturesque ruggedness, but not the kind of raw quality that I would guess that the place had at the time. But it's for anyone who might be thinking of visiting or emigrating or investing, it's rather reassuring as an image. Then there was the Great Fire of 46. And you're probably familiar with William Best's prints of buildings. Did them in more cities than this. He came here presumably to help with the rebuilding of St. John's. He's an artist as well as an architect. And you can see the comfort with architecture in his work. He did 10 prints of buildings in St. John's, and they were sold by subscription, which does suggest there's some marketing, some market beginning. And I guess on the left-hand slide, only the bank building is still there as Anna Templeton Center. Interesting, I guess, boring. Another image I think many of you will find familiar, although it's one I really like for the sense it gives you of the bowl, the harbour, and of the finger piers, as well as how heavily used the south side was as at the time. And Albert Ruger was probably the best known of the American bird's eye or panorama artists who developed this particular type of image in the 70s, 80s. It was a very popular approach to depicting cities in the US, but less successful in Canada. And Ruger did about 200 prints overall in his career, but about 50 showed Canadian communities. And I think perhaps it was at a time when the American West was growing rapidly, and I think there's a certain appreciation of American empire expansion there that wasn't echoed in Canada, so it may be that's why it didn't really take off as a popular art form. Keep this sort of aerial perspective in mind when we get to some much more contemporary work. There are echoes. To this point, all of the artists had come from elsewhere, mainly Britain, and were that mix of amateurs, military trained, and a couple of professional. John William Hayward was an exception, born in St. John's, self-taught, and he did build a career as an artist, producing images mainly between 1880s and 1911, and he did apparently well enough to support 9 children. And with a sort of shrewd mix, you will know the paintings of house flags that he did for various merchant families. He also did paintings of the fisheries, ships in ice, civic events. And some of his sketches were sold to the new kinds of illustrated journals that had appeared, like Harper's Weekly, and they would buy works from on-site artists and then turn them over to their engravers. And given the growth of those publications, there's an insatiable appetite for imagery, and particularly in terms of Newfoundland, things like laying of the cable and aspects of the fishery, icebergs. But Hayward was, as I say, the exception in terms of what you would call a professional artist. A writer has noted that Newfoundland art of the time, in fact, a long period of time, up to the Second World War, was left to outsiders and amateurs. This is, I think, the most gifted of the amateurs that were at work. And there's a nice little circular touch. Henry Bradshaw was the grandson of the Royal Navy surgeon on board the HMS Pegasus, that ship that the Mears logbook represented. And according to family lore, he had a falling out with the captain and was left ashore at Placentia when the ship sailed. Anyway, a number of his works were done in this circular format. They're on metal lids, but nobody to date has been able to figure out what they are lids for. Rockwell Kent, actually, this was from a first trip by him, and he made one or two sketches of St. John's, but his interest was actually in coming back later and spending a year in Brigus. And in the sort of post, 1870 on, there continued to be a number of visiting artists coming through, but they weren't interested in the city anymore. They were heading for the smaller communities. They were interested in the sort of wild natural environment or icebergs, and in particular William Bradford and Frederick Church made voyages up the Labrador specifically to capture icebergs. And Church's great iceberg painting, this is in the Dallas Museum of Art, and it's constantly reproduced. And there was also a man named Augustus Rockwell who worked in Labrador. No images of St. John's. I think that's another book. But through this period, and 1870 to 1940 is a big scoop of time, but because not a lot was happening. Aside from the visiting artists, there were the artists who came assigned by the illustrated papers. Another technology that developed was photography, of course, in 1857, taken up quite enthusiastically by Newfoundlanders, and certainly there were notable photographers like Holloways and Parsons, who I think deserve their own book. There's an out-of-print one that the museum did many years ago, and it's probably time someone did another. And the arrival of photography really freed artists up to work from their own imaginations, do what they wished from that point on. And so art here has always tended to be representational, but the way people approached it has, of course, started to modify and continued to modify. But early in the century, St. John's, Newfoundland, still not a place where anyone intending to have a serious art career could stay. there was absolutely no infrastructure. No, well, once there was a St. John's School of Art established, there by J.W. Nichols. Once it closed in 1908, there was nothing. No commercial dealers, no public or private galleries, no studios, essentially no market, and if one can cite Ray Perlin's experience, no encouraging families either. Ray was one of the people who chose to go away to pursue art more seriously. J.W. Nichols' best pupil was Margaret Campbell McPherson, and she went to Edinburgh after she finished high school and never returned. Became, in fact, a quite eminent artist in Europe, and others went to the Western U.S. or to Canada. Robert Pilot, being one of the Newfoundland-born artists who really spent his career based in Montreal, although he was back here numerous times and made many images of Newfoundland. And Rhoda Dawson was another example of an artist from away, brought here by the Grenfell Industrial to design rugs, although she was, I think, a bit too feisty for the Grenfell. And her designs were deemed too contemporary. So she didn't last long there, but she did spend a couple of years traveling in the province and made some interesting imagery, this being one, kind of a fresh, different take on the Narrows. And to me it almost feels as if she was designing a cartoon for a tapestry or something. The way she has structured it, there are other a few sketches in the collection at Memorial, including a couple of interesting ones that she did in the operating room in Twillingate, which I guess infection control officers would have something to say about these days. So activity was fairly minimal here in the 30s and into the 40s. The 1930s in Newfoundland were pretty dreadful. Art making would be way down the list. But in the 40s, probably the largest body of work showing the city was by the official Canadian war artists who were posted here or came through. And Harold Beeman being one of them. And I guess while I was putting the book together, I was thinking there have been generations now who probably have not thought at all about what St. John's must have looked and felt like during the wartime. And certainly some sketches you find in the Canadian War Museum, show Ducker Street and snipers based on rooftops and security around the harbor and so forth. And of course, this kind of traffic in the harbor. Tom Wood, my favorite of the war artists, actually, with this I don't know when I came across the work on the left, but it's the first time I certainly realized that the tunnels in the Southside Hills had been used for ammunition storage. And then the painting on the right, I think, is really wonderful in the way it creates an atmosphere of crowding and activity and different ships contending and so forth. Most of the War Museum, the Beaverbrook Art Collection at the War Museum, most of it is online. You can go on and search and see what's been produced about the city. Or there's a man named named Albert Couture, who painted a lot in Gander at a radar station. Sorry, not Gander, in Labrador. We come to 1949, what I think is kind of a low point in the development of the visual arts here. And there is this condescending, but not inaccurate, quote from the Canadian Encyclopedia. But the painting itself, to mark Confederation, the Canadian government proposed to present this Holland painting to the people of the province. And the province's response was that there was no place secure or with public access where they could actually hang this work, and so they didn't want to accept it. And so it went into the collection of the National Gallery. So, a depressing point in time. Peter Neary, I think, was the first to draw attention to this painting, and certainly he and I had a conversation about it. And I'd say within a day of Brian Tobin making a formal commitment to building the rooms, I was writing Pierre Thébert asking for the painting, which was delivered when the rooms opened in 2009. However, just as this point in 1949 was depressing, the first primary event in the development of a professional community arrived, and that was the arrival of Reg and Helen Shepherd, who had finished training at the Ontario College of Art and came home determined to be able to make a living here as professional artists. And so they did, starting with the opening of the Newfoundland Academy of Art. And a couple of other crucial things happened at that point. Well, actually, I get a wee bit ahead of myself. I think, despite the sense nothing much was happening, I think there were some very fragile seeds planted with the establishment in 1925 of Memorial University College. However painfully colonial it apparently could be seen in interests and attitudes, I think still the faculty and staff brought a range of skills and knowledge and so on to the province, and there were a range of opportunities for the public as well as students. In addition to formal classes, faculty gave radio broadcasts about an amazing range of topics, all of which I can imagine you could learn over radio, but I couldn't learn physics in a classroom. So anyway, they did teacher training that involved art appreciation, and they had a large collection of art reproductions, and a person named Mrs. A.C. Hunter was the honorary curator of said collection, and she arranged public exhibitions. So those kinds of activities, I think, established a kind of fragile interest. And then the impact of the war and of Confederation, I think, set the scene for the Shepherd's return and for all the development that has subsequently happened with changes in the economy and the infrastructure and transportation links and the demographics, the sort of education levels and backgrounds of people that were in the bureaucracy. So you had a society that I think was becoming much more diverse and mature and looking for things beyond the basics, looking for sort of recreational and social opportunities and the sorts of things that art galleries and an art market fitted into. So, although progress was slow, I think it did start in the 50s with the Newfoundland Academy of Art and a slow growth in the community of artists then. Ray Perlin came back, Paul Parsons as well, studied at the Academy but then went away and came back. And other people like Hans Melis taught with the Shepherds for some time. In 61, the Shepherds gave up the school but continued Reg as a high school art teacher, Helen as a full-time painter, and more or less the official portraitist of the town. But in the 60s, well, a couple of crucial things: the establishment of the art gallery, so that there was a focus and a source of education and animation and advocacy for the visual arts, as well as the beginning of tours of Newfoundland work outside the province. Munn's Extension Division became heavily involved in the visual performing arts. And the university activity brought to the province some key folks. Chris Pratt as the first curator of the gallery, very briefly. Peter Bell following him, and Don Wright, who came as an art specialist and has been a really key, somewhat, I think, under-recognized figure in the art making here. Not just art making, the infrastructure as well. And I think an important point, Ray Perlin was writing art criticism for the Daily News, and I think a critical voice is important. More than one critical voice would be wonderful in the communities. But that was a contribution, and then, of course, subsequently, Peter Bell became a critic. So Don Wright, lovely painting. You can see this is not a painting about precise information. It's one of a personal response and an expressionist style. And Frank Lapointe painted in a rather similar style at the time as well. But Don went through many media and many ways of working. Very important as an educator and a mentor and a role model, and a co-founder of the print shop. There are very few images, either here or for that matter, not many in the book, from the 60s and 70s, because although there was growth, a lot of it was with artists who lived outside the city, or their interests were more in the sort of rural environment. So there were relatively limited images of St. John's being produced. This being one. So I think founding of St. Michael's Print Shop was probably the key piece of infrastructure in 1973, actually. Because of the facility it provided for artists to produce the work that they then very successfully marketed. It provided training, but contact with hundreds of visiting artists. And Newfoundland really kind of went on the map nationally as a printmaking center. The legend kind of continues now that it's moved into St. John's. This was also when the Moscoffs opened their gallery down on Duckworth Street, which some of you will remember. It lasted for quite some time, notable for its red plush staircase. But nonetheless, I think it was the first gallery to survive for many years and to market Newfoundland work. certainly played an important part at that time. Peter Bell, as I say, became the Telegram art critic then for a number of years. But minimal city imagery. Manny Buckheit, however, in pinhole form or other photographs, has done many images of the city, and a lot of it no longer there. And the same is true of Scott Gowdy, who was a young artist who sort of got his start at the print shop and mentored by Don Wright, and of course has gone on working, and comes back every few years, comes back and does a sort of set of images of the city again. Some very important developments in the 80s with the Arts Council in particular. Money's always good. And they also stimulated the establishment of the Provincial Art Bank, and of course Grenfell College established the first degree granting fine arts programs. And the community grew. A substantial number of artists moved in at that point. Really, there's much more diversity in styles and media and image and so forth. But there's still that sort of more rural focus. I think it's just a fact of where we are somehow. Jean-Claude Roy is certainly a reminder that Newfoundland imagery continues to be enriched by people who are here part-time, and I'm sure most of you saw his magnum opus that he produced just before Christmas with his paintings of every community in Newfoundland. So he's made a very serious commitment to the province. So you now have views from within as well as views from without. Despite the look of it, this is an urban image. Pam spent a number of years going fishing with Eli Tucker out of Kitty Bitty, and a lot of her work has dealt with the fishery, a lot of it spurred by those experiences. And this is just one example where she's kind of given a rather emblematic treatment to the stuff around Eli's Wharf, which is no longer there either. And in its place, there's what is now called the Kitty Bitty Plantation. It's a series of sort of incubator for craftspeople, and really worth a visit. A little history, a little humor. And then the last few images, sort of the 1990s and beyond, because I think the infrastructure becomes virtually complete by the end of the 90s. At least the final promise is there. So the arrival of Eastern European artists who bring some different skills and styles and energy into the province. So sudden growth in bronze sculpture. And of course, Louis Boykoff established a foundry so that people, in fact, have the option of making a bronze sculpture, casting bronze here in the province. And other artists with particular skills, and I particularly would mention Vesela Brakalova, who was the designer for the City Scene book, did a wonderful job. I've got a copy if anyone wants to take a look at it. And she just won a gold medal for the design of the book in I guess, Atlantic Provinces competition. So I hope we can do more books together. So these are the kinds of pieces that fell into place through the 1990s. And although the closing down of Extension was, and its visual performing arts section was a pretty bleak moment, in my view, the decade ended on a pretty positive note when the Manitoban government made a commitment to the rooms with the gallery, museum, and archives, and that, of course, opened in 2005. So Jennifer and Grant they were two of the fairly early people coming out of the Granville College program. And there have been many more since then, and they, of course, have filtered into the galleries and are helping run organizations like Eastern Edge and the print shop, and established here and in other places, shown here and in other places. So it's a substantial contribution to what goes on. John Hartman, an artist who comes frequently to the province, and usually, and some of his later work has got a more pronounced, but uses a slight aerial view, which, if you think back, that's probably the only commonality with that Albert Ruger bird's eye view of St. John's. Otherwise, the intentions and the style and the approach are radically different. One of the things that attracts John to Newfoundland, besides, of course, the landscape, is he's very interested in history and in stories. And so these little squiggles in the sky, they're not in all his paintings, but they are usually anecdotes he's been told while he's painting, or incidents that he's read about, because he does a lot of historical reading in preparation for coming and painting various areas. So, been running retreats here since the 80s. His work often extremely elegant, but I hope that some of you have seen this full work. This is a detail. The work is 15 pairs like this of each road leading in and out of St. John's. She photographed the signage on either side of the highway. It's, as she would say, not a postcard view of the city, but the intention, really, most of her work is focused around a particular idea, and so her intention here, certainly is to provoke ideas about boundaries and city making, and no doubt questions of development. One of a few sort of more contemporary images, as is this painting of Chris Pratt's. I did, in the book, there are a couple of early watercolors of Christopher's, one of the Battery and one of the harbor mouth, or the river mouth of the 1950s, which disappeared, I guess, with the harbor development in the 60s. And my last slide seems to say something about St. John's at the kind of pivotal point we may be at, or maybe past it, I don't know. But, for those of you who might not recognize it, the building beyond where the women are is now the Blue Drop Learning Center building, that blue one. It's the Royal Trust on the right. And one of the saviors of our economy down at the base, sealing off the harbor. Anyway, so there have been changes since that was taken in 2007. Although my guess is the women are probably still there. But anyway, I liked it for that, whatever it is, and sort of suggests as thought-provoking as Marlene's, perhaps. Anyway, that is the end of the presentation. So thank you very much. And if people have questions, I would try and answer them. And if people have observations they'd like to make, even better.
Thank you, Pat. That was a wonderful perspective on, I guess, how St. John's were perceived and portrayed for quite a few centuries. So appreciate it very much. Thank you. Any comments or questions for Pat? Yes, John.
I was just going to make a comment that the Ruger Bird's Eye piece is for sale as a poster at the Center for Newfoundland Studies. $25 for the poster, and with a $200 frame, it looks fabulous.
Well, that's great. I didn't know that. I see the one down at Belvin all the time, and I knew they must be somewhere.
I think Pat mentioned actually that her book, City Singing, she has a few copies here tonight if anyone would like to purchase one.
Ah, strange coincidence. But also there's a copy if you just want to take a look at it and see some of the neat things that Bessel did by way of design. It's, anyway, we were happy with how it turned out and hope to do more. Because I think the sort of visual history of Newfoundland seems to me not to have been very much explored and certainly not easily available to the public in any form really, but print form. And so I hope to do more of that. I hope other people will as well.
Yeah. Yes.
Way from Labrador. Thanks very much. I really enjoyed this. Did Molly Boback ever paint here? I noticed she had Bruno Boback, but I wondered if Molly Boback was
No, she never painted here. She came and did a workshop back in the, which I attended actually back in the very early 80s, I would think. But didn't make work herself. And I remember Ray Kerlin took that workshop as well, and I remember Molly looking at her sketches and just saying, I don't know why you're here, I can't teach you anything. But anyway, of course Ray stayed. But no, and Bruno, I think, I'm not aware of other images of St. John's that he did. I think he probably was here. By the time he did that, he would have been artist in residence and director of the Art Center at the University of New Brunswick, and was probably here for an Atlantic Provinces Art Gallery Association meeting. That was the first association that gave the gallery, then under Peter Bell, a chance to tour Newfoundland work around the Atlantic Provinces.
Using one of your slides, the word Renaissance, which we all heard applied to the arts in this province of, say, the 70s on or something like that. And I'm curious to, and it seems quite evident from the presentation that this is perhaps a renaissance, certainly not a renaissance, because it's not preceded by any, or certainly not local art, as you were pointing out. I was always curious why is it because of the better term, or?
Well, it's actually a term that Sandra Gwynn, a writer from here, she was writing an article for Saturday Night magazine. She used the term, and I think you're quite right. There was not much in terms of visual arts early on, but in terms of theater and music and so forth, at that point in time, of course, people were. And that's what it was about. It was looking back at cultural, traditions here and sort of re-energizing them. So, for part of the arts, I think it was a good term. Visual art, not so.
Anything else? Okay. Just to mention a couple of things before we leave. Our next lecture, our lectures are always the last Thursday of each month, so the 28th of March will be presented by Heidi Coombs-Soner. Heidi is a postdoctoral fellow at the History Department here at Memorial. You may be familiar with the periodical Among the Deep Sea Fishers, which came out in the early 1900s and lasted quite a period through the 20th century. But Heidi is interested in how that periodical portrayed people, nurses, and missions associated with the Grenfell mission. It turned into a promotional vehicle, really, for Grenfell recruits, and that'll be the subject of her talk, so it should be quite interesting. And Terry Bishop Sterling wanted me to mention as well, the History Department at Memorial is starting a series of community conversations in history. You may see these outside, but if you want to pick one up, there's 3 lectures in March